Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the White House this morning. My name is Doug Rand from the Office of Science and Technology Policy here, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the White House Clean Energy Investment Summit. Today's event will serve as a forum for foundations, family offices, institutional investors, and others to share ideas and insights on scaling private sector investment in solutions to climate change, including innovative technologies to reduce carbon pollution. This event will be live streamed at whitehouse.gov/live. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Brian Deese, who oversees climate, conservation, and energy policy as Senior Advisor to the President.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you to all of you for being here today. We're incredibly excited to have to be able to host this event. I do want to start by thanking Doug and Dr. Holdren and Tom Khalil and the whole OSTP team, the rest of the White House and EOP team that have worked on this, and our colleagues at the Department of Energy, and a range of other agencies that have stepped up and made commitments in this context. I want to be very brief because I know that you all have an outstanding program. We got started early this morning with a showcase of some of the entrepreneurial innovation that this whole event is about, and we'll run this through the day. And I do want to just make a couple of points at the top of this event. When we were contemplating at the beginning of this year what more we could do as an administration to try to push clean energy innovation. There was a lot of good work and a lot of activity and a lot of outside input from many of you all that said, what if we were to challenge the institutional investment and philanthropic community to step up? And if so, what more could we do as an administration to make that possible? And in February, when we made the initial announcement of this, and when I stood up at the ARPA-E Summit and said we're going to try to hit a $2 billion goal, we thought we were being ambitious on that front. In fact, some of us were worried we were being too ambitious. But I am incredibly excited to be able to stand here today and say that because of the work and the effort that went into planning and structuring this process, we have dramatically exceeded that goal. And so today we're in a position to announce that, that many of you and other stakeholders have stepped up to commit more than $4 billion to accelerate investment in clean energy solutions. That's a really exciting. As our Vice President would say, that is a big deal. And thankfully for all of us, we'll actually have the Vice President here later today to speak to this accomplishment in person. So why is this a big deal? Above all, as the President reminds us, and as we know every day in our work, climate change is real, it's being driven by human activity, and it is happening right now. We also know that solving the issue of climate change is a thorny problem. It's a thorny technological problem, it's a thorny political problem, and it's a global challenge. But we also know that clean energy technology is not only an essential part of that solution, but a place where we are seeing unbelievably exciting advances happening in real time. Since the President took office, and the period of the last 6 years has been a real period of success for clean energy technology, and to my mind it has been an improbably American success. And I use both those terms deliberately, both improbable and American. Improbable because in the face of both entrenched interests who have a stake in the status quo and a lot of deniers, climate change deniers, technological deniers, it's the American innovators and the American entrepreneurial spirit that has kept pushing the envelope and kept asking, why not? And improbable because since 2009, we've tripled the amount of energy that we produce from wind. We've increased solar generation more than 20 times over. these were not the predicted paths when the president came into office. The cost of solar energy has dropped by 50%. And every 4 minutes, another home or business goes solar. These are trends that are accelerating faster than people had previously thought possible. American, because we're doing our part to try to encourage this development. You'll hear from our DOE team about the work that we're doing in our national labs, supported by things like ARPA-E and the DARPA program. We know that clean energy innovations need the foundation of basic research, and we are stepping up to provide that. But we also know that we need to do more, and that the federal government has more tools that they can bring together. That too often, as we've heard in our work, that investors don't know about promising work that is supported by early basic R&D through federal programs. Too often, entrepreneurs that have ideas aren't able to get the capital to go to scale. And when that happens, we're missing an opportunity, and the federal government can help to solve that. So today we're taking a cue from those lessons, and we are looking to go beyond the problems and focus on pragmatic solutions and try to ask each of our agencies and all of the tools that we have at the federal government level to try to deploy against this effort. You'll hear about a lot of those specifics today, about the Department of Energy's new center that they're standing up, about guidance that the Department of Treasury is working on, about efforts that the Small Business Administration is undertaking. And I hope that you will dig into those and give us very candid feedback and market feedback on how they will work more effectively to help achieve our shared goals. Because at the end of the day, the way we're going to solve this problem is by all of us working together. It requires us to be open to new ideas, to harness the innovative spirit that we saw with those innovators that were presenting their technologies this morning. And it requires all of you, the representatives from firms, family offices, foundations, all of you here today, taking this to heart. I know that you all are looking for new ways of collaborating and cooperating. You are looking past traditional investment models to try to find new collaborations that work, and we want to be a partner with you on that. We are firmly committed that a low-carbon, clean energy future is the future. This is the improbably American success story that will define the next generation, and we want to work with you to tackle that challenge head on. So I just want to close by saying thank you to all of you. Thank you for stepping up to this challenge that we put forward, and I hope that you view this convening today as yet another step in a process that we want to stay committed to, of modifying, enhancing, improving our federal programs to try to encourage more of the investment and more of the innovation that we know will help solve this problem. So thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm John Holdren, President Obama's Science and Technology Advisor, Director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. I want to add my welcome to this amazing group. We in the administration are very excited about this event. President Obama is very excited about it. This is really a big deal for us, and I want to thank you all for being here. I also want to thank all the folks who made this possible. Colleagues from the administration I'd like to call out for special thanks include Deputy Secretary of Energy Elizabeth Sherwood Randall, Dr. Ellen Williams, the Director of the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy, Dr. David Danielson, the Assistant Secretary of Energy for Efficiency and Renewables, William Ferris, the Associate Laboratory Director for Innovation Partnering and Outreach at the National Renewable Energy Lab, John McWilliams, the Senior Advisor to the Secretary in the Department of Energy, Dr. Pete Lyons, the Assistant Secretary of Energy for Nuclear Energy, Admiral Dennis McGinn, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Energy, installations and environment. And of course, from my office, OSTP, I want particularly to thank Doug Rand and Aaron Sulman, who I think hold the record for the amount of sleep lost in preparing for this event. We, of course, have had many partners across the Executive Office of the President as well, thanks to them. And we have in this room just an amazing collection of innovators, funders, facilitators from the government, the private sector, academia, and philanthropy. Too many folks, obviously, to acknowledge individually. Everybody in the room, I think, is a star, but we are most grateful to all of you, both for being here and for the commitments you're making in this incredibly important domain. I think, as we all know, a global low-carbon economy in 2050 is going to have to meet the energy needs of 9 or 10 billion people using technologies that will have to be more advanced than the technologies that are in place today. Buildings, agriculture, machines must be dramatically more energy efficient. Cars, trucks, and planes are going to have to run on electricity, biofuels, or hydrogen. Electricity generation is going to need to come primarily from renewables and nuclear energy. The emissions from most of the remaining fossil fuel combustion are going to need to be diverted permanently from the atmosphere. Under President Obama's leadership, the federal government has already made unprecedented investments in clean energy innovation. We're currently spending around $3.2 billion a year on clean energy research, development, and demonstration. When you include incentives for deployment, that goes up to the range of $7.5 billion a year. At the same time, though, the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, PCAST, corporate leaders on the American Energy Innovation Council, the International Energy Agency, all have recommended that the amount of money being spent on global energy research, development, and demonstration in clean energy technologies has got to be dramatically ramped up. But even bigger than the challenge of funding for research and development and demonstration is the challenge of the valley of death, finding the capital to move innovations through that valley across to commercial success on the other side. And this, of course, is where the role of financing and the focus of this summit come in. Through the new Clean Energy Investment Initiative, the Obama administration is committed to catalyzing private sector investment in solutions to climate change, innovative technologies with breakthrough potential to reduce carbon pollution. And the commitments that are being rolled out here today are a huge down payment on meeting that challenge in the clean energy domain. You and your organizations are setting a great example for how investing in clean energy technology can not only have global environmental benefits by reducing carbon pollution, but can generate high financial returns for investors. Through your leadership, the global transition to a low-carbon economy is gaining momentum. It's opening up tremendous opportunities for more long-term investors in breakthrough clean energy technologies. I am looking forward greatly to seeing today's investment commitments put into action in the coming months and years. Looking forward to hearing about the results of the discussions going forward during the day. But I am confident that this meeting will be a turning point in ramping up the benefits that investment in clean energy can bring to our economy, our environment, and our world. So thank you again very much. And I know President Obama thanks you as well.
Thank you, Dr. Holdren. Next up, we have a fireside chat on the state of clean energy investment. And that will include Dr. Elizabeth Sherwood Randall, who is the Deputy Secretary for the U.S. Department of Energy, as well as Jagdeep Bakker, who is Chief Investment Officer at the University of California Board of Regents. So without further ado, please welcome both guests to the stage.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the White House. Very happy that you're here. Earlier this year, at our Advanced Research Projects Agency, or ARPA-E, Energy Summit, and Ellen McWilliams sitting right here. Ellen Williams, our head of ARPA-E. John McWilliams is our Senior Advisor for Finance at the Department of Energy. Earlier this year at the ARPA-E Summit, Brian Deese announced that the Department of Energy would lead an effort to connect mission-driven investors with clean energy opportunities. And we're here today to formally launch this initiative with all of you. At DOE, we are determined to accelerate the deployment of clean energy technologies. More clean energy helps improve the energy security of the United States by increasing and diversifying our domestic energy supply. It also strengthens our economy and it creates jobs. This is one of the most dynamic sectors of our economy. And clean energy technologies help us to reduce carbon emissions and avoid the worst effects of climate change. The approach we have taken at DOE is to work to strengthen what Secretary Moniz calls the innovation chain, from fundamental science research to technology development to initial and then full-scale deployment. So for example, we observed that even with technologies like photovoltaic solar panels, which were increasing in efficiency and decreasing in price, the high cost of capital was a big barrier to large-scale deployment of solar PV. In fact, in 2008, just before the administration came into office, there were no utility-scale PV projects in the United States. By providing loan guarantees from DOE to the first 5 utility-scale solar PV projects in the United States, we demonstrated the maturity of the technology and the viability of the business model. Other investors became interested, and today we have 17 utility-scale solar projects that have been funded by the private sector. Utility-scale PV solar can now produce enough electricity to power close to 1.5 million average American homes. So today we're here to address a similar gap in the innovation chain. Early-stage technologies of the kind that ARPA-E supports are riskier than many other investments, but they offer potentially game-changing results in climate outcomes. So there is, as we all know, a big unmet call for capital investment for technologies that are in an early stage of their development. This time, as John Holdren noted, is known by many of you as the Valley of Death. Innovative energy technologies struggle to find the capital they need to scale and ultimately to commercialize. So we have been working over the past 4 months at DOE to find ways to close this gap by connecting mission-driven investors with the information they need to identify investments that are a good fit. Foundations, university endowments, and institutional investors can form what we describe as the investment ecosystem needed to support new clean energy technologies. That ecosystem will include investors with the resources, the vision, and the motivation to take on the challenges of this early stage. It will also include some investors who see mitigating climate through technology as a way to reduce risks for other parts of their portfolio. And it will include some investors with a mission to pursue social goods with a higher appetite for risk. We want to catalyze the connections between the companies developing new technologies and mission-driven investors like those of you here today. DOE's expertise can help you to find good matches for the investment profile that you have in mind. So as part of this effort, I'm delighted to announce today that the Department of Energy is establishing a Clean Energy Impact Investment Center, which will make DOE expertise easier for the public and investors to access. The center will provide a single point of access for existing public information. It will share research and analysis produced by the department and our national laboratory network on relevant developments in clean energy technology. It will serve as a clearinghouse for information about energy and climate programs at DOE and other government agencies like the Department of Agriculture or the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And it will aggregate and make available existing public information, for example, on early-stage technology products and companies working with ARPA-E. Bringing together this information in a way that's more accessible to people like you will make it easier for mission-driven investors to understand the clean energy industry and the opportunities that it offers. We're going to locate this center within our new Office of Technology Transitions, which was announced earlier this spring. And I think we have Jetta Wong here. Put up your hand, Jetta, in the audience today. So you'll have an opportunity to talk with Jetta. As you've heard here with us today, we are being joined by Jagdeep Singh Bashar, the Chief Investment Officer and Vice President of Investments at the University of California. Jagdeep has an impressive track record as an entrepreneur and investor, having previously served as Executive Vice President of Venture and Innovation for one of Canada's largest and most diversified investment fund managers. In his current role, Jagdeep is responsible for the UC Pension Endowment short-term and total return investment pools. With a total portfolio of approximately $91 billion, the UC's investments make them a major player among institutional investors. And the UC system is also a world leader in clean energy research. I'll just add as a personal note, as a native Californian, having spent many years in the communities of UC campuses. Indeed, I was at the lab school at UCLA as a child, and then have lived more recently in the Berkeley area. I'm very pleased to welcome you here with us today, Jagdeep. So I think what we're going to do on this more than 90-degree day is have a fireside chat without the fire, fortunately, and I'm going to come and take a seat with you to do that.
Working?
Is this one? Yes, working. All right.
Fire away.
All right, good. So we're going to start out with a question of what the goals are for you in the UC system for your investments, and then how clean energy fits into that portfolio of investments.
Sounds good. And it's good to know that we both have lived in the same neighborhood in California. And coming here today, I first want to start out by commending all the great work the White House has done and the leadership it's shown, as well as the Department of Energy. And I know that being involved in many of the phone calls over the last several months, there are many, many people in the room, countless, that have worked. And it's very impressive to see that what was an initial goal of $2 billion today exceeds $4 billion in commitments. And these aren't commitments that can be made by any one institution. And I think the beauty of what we're trying to accomplish here today is everybody needs to come together and work together. We at the University of California play a small part in that broader community that you've described of investors. As many of you know, the University of California has about 138,000 students, 250,000 faculty and staff. It's 10 campuses, 5 medical centers, 3 national labs affiliated also with the Department of Energy. And when you add all of that footprint together, we invest on behalf of all of these stakeholders, what is approximately now $100 billion across the various funds, and have been doing it for a very long time. We certainly find that being a global investor, we're all seeking out opportunities where the future is headed. And I think when we think about energy more broadly, and not even clean energy, you just can't ignore what is going on around the world. And the leadership that America has shown in this area, which starts with innovation and technology, all the way to scaling up and manufacturing these novel ideas and concepts, is the kind of leadership we need to continue to have to be successful as a country over the next 100 years. And to do that, I think all investors play a role. So I think we are excited about investing in these new types of opportunities, calling them renewable energy or clean energy. I like to call it new energy. And as we've all traditionally been investors in energy in our portfolios, we simply can't ignore investing in the new energy projects or concepts or opportunities that are out there. So with that in mind, no matter how we look at our asset allocation in stocks or bonds or alternatives or all across the board, companies today are embracing these ideas and these concepts, and especially in the energy space, the new and novel technologies that are maturing are presenting us good opportunities. So from my perspective, on behalf of the fund, it's really about finding these opportunities and investing in them. Now, I think as institutional investors, we play a certain role, and let me end up by saying, I know I've heard the term valley of death today. several times. But I hope we leave at the end of the day thinking this is a valley of opportunity. And coming sort of from Silicon Valley, how do we turn this valley of opportunity into a profitable valley of opportunity for investors like ourselves? But I think, family offices, endowments, foundations, philanthropists, the government, everyone needs to come together. And it just feels like the time is right. The momentum is growing this year, and I think there's a great opportunity in front of all of us.
That's a terrific way to begin the conversation. And I think I'll build on that by asking you, because you talked about the interest in new things, and that certainly animates the community around Silicon Valley. And we're talking about deploying technologies that are new, but that can mean a higher risk for investment. So I think for those here today to hear how you approach thinking about these risks
Right.
and the risk-benefit analysis that you have to do to decide whether you should make these investments as against other investments. How do you do that? How do you work with the UC Board of Regents? How does it work when you're in terrain that is less well charted?
Okay. So we've been investing our pension plan for 52 years. We've been investing the endowment for the last 80 years. My office has a history that's about 146 years old. Clearly, if you take the perspective of a long-term investor, and 2100 doesn't seem that far-fetched. I mean, the students today that we have at the University of California are going to be retiring then, and their children and grandchildren will certainly be living through this reality. So one of my deep investment beliefs, and I think our culture, is that we're a long-term investor. So doing nothing about the risks that climate poses or other environmental, social, governance type issues is a big risk. And so we have to think about these types of things as we evaluate our investment opportunities, because we're investing for the long term. And we're making decisions that are going to have implications over a long period of time. And in that context, you have to think about climate change, because it could impact the economics. Just in the last year, when we look at our traditional energy portfolios, I'm sure we're all asking these very simple questions about what are the risks of what's going on in the macro environment as it impacts traditional energy assets. So first and foremost, I would say that as an investor, you have to build a culture within your organization that incorporates these risks that are posed by sustainable type issues, environmental issues, and governance type issues, social issues in your investment framework. And that's the starting point. Now, when we look at opportunities in that framework and we think about new energy specifically, clearly there's a diverse spectrum, all the way from the very early stages to the later stages. And I think for different investors, we all have a variety of risk and return profiles. So when we're talking about foundations or endowments or philanthropists or mission-based capital, it's much better suited where you can afford to take the higher risk at the earlier stages. And I think in that context, research and innovation coming out of the labs and even the University of California with the mix of Silicon Valley is well suited to partner up with the angel investors and the philanthropists and those types of investors with that risk profile. But I think what we've learned is that when we look back at the last 20 years and we think of all the venture capitalists and other investors that have paved the way in investing in energy and green energy, there are a lot of lessons we can learn from that. And they've taken great risk to show us that there is an opportunity here. But what we learned as part of those great risks are that it's not just about the great technology, but you need to scale things up. You need capital to build out the manufacturing plants. You need to take that capital and build out the large facilities and have the working capital needs, the debt financing, the project financing that it takes. And I think that's where, when we think about institutional investors that tend to be attracted to larger projects, we can be a good partner to the earlier stage capital and come alongside with them and take the maturing companies that present the best potential and invest alongside with projects that have been de-risked, and then come in with that capital to help show these companies to the light of the day and take them through the whole life cycle of becoming a successful company. I think many of us would love to see a Google moment in energy. And I think what that's going to take is institutional investor capital partnering with the early stage capital from family offices and endowments to make that a reality. And I think in that context, when I think about our office and the role we can play, institutions are looking to invest in commodities and energy and real assets. So for me to make a commitment on behalf of the University of California of $1 billion over the next 5 years in new energy, it's certainly a very realistic commitment because we can put that capital in partnership with everyone else here in the room. And I think that's how we can de-risk our investments, but also be involved in the projects that have the best shot of being successful over time. So I think it's all of us coming together, and the collaboration is probably the biggest factor in my mind of creating the best opportunity set to see companies succeed over a long time period. And you need patience. I mean, there's no questions about it in energy. We should not kid ourselves about the fact that great ideas are going to need the time it takes to become the next big successful companies. And long-term investors should behave in a patient fashion. And I think that's one of the challenges we have in today's world of short-termism. We tend to look for instantaneous results. We tend to look for the next big IPO. And some of these things just don't align with the nature of how clean energy and new energy is going to evolve over the next 20 years. So I think de-risking in that fashion through collaboration is probably the best way I can think of.
So I think this goes to the very point of the convening of this group today, that you really do need that ecosystem. And the president often says in many contexts, we're stronger when we stand together. And that's essentially your message of we need all the players here to come in and join in this goal. We contribute the science that will enable some of these technologies to be brought to market more quickly. And I will say that while I recognize the need for patience, I would also say we feel very impatient. So we feel like we have a very short runway. Those of us working on behalf of the president and this administration want to push out as much innovation as we can to get it ready for you all to take it forward. And so there's little patience. We do have to respect the science, and the researchers need to do their jobs, but we are also, in every way we can, trying to support them and enable them to deliver results. You're far ahead of this, and I think one thing to ask you for those in the room and those who will be listening to this because we're streaming it, for your advice, Jagdeep, is if you haven't started down this path, if you're in a university, if you're a foundation, if you're a fund, a family office, and you're thinking about getting started in this area, what would be your advice for taking those first steps if it seems a little uncertain and you don't quite know how to engage? What would you do?
Well, let me describe the journey that we've gone through over the last year. And I'm new to the University of California in the last year. And one of the very first things that I had to address was this recent movement around divesting from fossil fuels. And that's how it got started for me. And as we engaged with our stakeholders, and I'm sure many others are facing the same types of questions as if you're a university or an endowment, and you're working with your stakeholders and your students and your faculty, these are the types of questions we all have to ask, or are being asked of us in our positions. So we looked at it and said, first of all, as a university, we can do a lot towards carbon neutrality, and we've set a goal around being carbon neutral by 2025. Now that takes a broad commitment to invest in your own organizations. And so I would say that's one of the first things to do, is to think about your own broad organization and look at what your goals are towards carbon neutrality. And then beyond that, from an investment portfolio perspective, there are many strategies that have been employed, such as you can exclude fossil fuel companies, you can divest from things. We've leaned more towards the concept of investing in solutions. We feel that by actively engaging with the broader community, you can have a stronger voice, and coming together, you can actually have a more meaningful impact over time. And by divesting and staying on the sidelines, you essentially cut off yourselves from having that active voice and participating. So that's the first thing. We all need to think about what you're going to do in terms of your own organizational philosophy. And the deeper we thought about it, we came to the conclusion that this is not about having a list of things that you're going to include or exclude from your portfolio, but everyone in the investments organization has to deeply think about this as part of their culture. Because being sustainable today as a corporation or as running a company, it's not a choice. It's good business. And it can and will have an impact on returns in the future, even as a company. So if this is just a good way of doing business, then in that context, you really need to make this part of your overall framework and your culture. And it just can't be an isolated event that you're paying attention to for any given period of time. So once we came to that conclusion that this had to be part of the investment framework, then it becomes a cultural issue of getting people in your organization to embrace this and then to act in that manner. That is not easy. Changing cultures is not easy. And so I would say that, you know, this is us after a year of going through this process. We're at the point now of trying to build that culture within our organization, and I view it as a journey. But in addition to all of this, I think to be active and to learn from what's going on around the world, proactively investing is also a very important part of that overall decision that we've made to be investing in solutions. And then I would say that looking at the last 20 or 10 years of investors that have been active in the space, I think one of the things we've seen is that many people have tried to create companies and then essentially compete with each other, which the challenge with that is you're putting a lot of the same capital that can be used in a collaborative fashion in competing efforts. And then you run out of money because you've got 5 of the same types of companies trying to do the same thing. But in energy, you need a lot of capital to make that a reality. So from the get-go, we've made a decision that if we are going to participate and invest, we want to do that in partnership with family offices, with foundations, with other universities and endowments, and also with my peers in the institutional investor community. I mean, it's fantastic to see that a number of institutional investors have committed today from different parts of the world, even outside of the United States, to what we're trying to do. But I would say for us in the university and endowment space, all of us put together, we shouldn't feel alone in this initiative. I think there's an incredible energy that'll come from coming together and working together and thinking about the solutions together. And that would be my best advice, is don't think this is just your problem. Think about this, that you're part of a broader community, and if an event like this today really helps catalyze that type of effort in your institute, in the Department of Energy, and the other things that the family offices are doing by coming together. These are all great examples of mobilizing resources so that people don't feel that they're lonely in trying to approach this very complex issue.
Thanks for that wonderful answer. I would just add, some may think that this is only about deployment in the United States, and I want to emphasize what you said about the importance of looking and learning around the world. I had the privilege of leading a presidential trade delegation with Secretary Pritzker to China about 6 weeks ago. And we brought 24 innovative American companies working in the clean energy space to China to advance the commitment that they made as part of the historic agreements reached by President Obama and President Xi with regard to our climate ambitions last year. And what was exciting was the urgency that we experienced from the Chinese leadership about adopting new technologies to face the tremendous challenges they face as they seek to develop, but do so in a way that enables people to live in their cities, which are becoming increasingly unlivable. And so what we know is that if we can get these technologies out into the market, it will advantage those who are investing in them tremendously, because there's a huge market out in the world for these technologies, and we're on the cutting edge. We bring that innovation that Brian talked about, that John Holdren talked about. We have this, the thing that everybody wants, and some of it is coming out of our labs, this foundational and then applied science work, and some of it, of course, is in the collaboration that we develop with the private sector. So we should all know what opportunity exists if we seize it.
I think China, India, Germany, amazing things are going on. And I think as we look out, every one of us in the room as leaders over the next 20 years, I mean, we should be thinking about forging partnerships and relationships with these countries. And China is a good partner to have because certainly this, I mean, we've had the luxury of seeing many Chinese come and visit us at the University of California and look at what's going on in our labs as well. I think this is, again, when we go beyond each of our individual institutions, this is a very complex global challenge, but it's also one of the best global opportunities we've ever seen in our lifetime. And that can only come from cooperating with each other. So I'm a very, very firm believer in partnering, in collaborating, in finding solutions where people can work together, because if you do it on your own, it just feels lonely and challenging.
Well, and also we have to motivate others to do what we know is what needs to be done for the survival of the planet. So they have to have a stake in it and an incentive to move in that direction. I think we've run through the time that we were allotted, and I really appreciate having had the opportunity to talk with you this morning. Thank you so much for coming. And again, to each of you for having made the trip to Washington to join us, for your commitment to this undertaking. We're so excited to work with you. I look forward to getting to know a number of you as you reach out to us at the Department of Energy and to working together, as you said, to advance our shared mission. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We're now going to move on. We have 3 panels today. Each is focused on a different kind of long-term investor. So first up, I hope you'll please welcome our first panel, which is really about the role of foundations, specifically in advancing climate solutions and clean energy innovation. And we're delighted that this panel will be moderated by Sonal Shah, who serves as the Executive Director at Georgetown University's Beck Center for Social Impact and Innovation. Sonal will introduce our panelists, and please welcome them now.
Especially following the panel that we just had on how institutional investors. Is it working now? No. Now? Can you hear me now? Okay. Sorry about that. I can hear myself, though. I will not repeat what I just said. You know, it's important to recognize that both institutional investors and philanthropy have done significant amount of work, especially in the climate, clean technology space. The last panel talked, the last fireside chat gave a little great insight into that and why it's important for long-term investments. And so what we hope to do with this panel is talk a little bit about why each of my colleagues here are making the investments and how they've done it with philanthropic capital and why they've done it. It's family foundation, it's corporate foundations, it's your endowment through your foundation, but also just understanding how you've approached this. So let me start, if you wouldn't mind, and I'll introduce each of them as they speak. So let me start with Mary Wenzel. Mary is a Senior Vice President and the Director of Environmental Affairs for Wells Fargo. And Mary, would love to hear you talk a little bit about kind of your relationship with NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and how Wells Fargo got involved in that and why. If you could just give us a little bit of insight, that'd be great.
Happy to do that. Thank you. I'm on? I'm good. So Wells Fargo is a leading corporate foundation. We give several $100 million away, invest in our communities every year. We believe that when our communities do well, we all do well, and we do well as a company. And that's critical to our vision and values as a company. We didn't traditionally have a focus on environmental philanthropy, sustainability philanthropy, but in 2012 we announced a new commitment for the bank around sustainability, and the commitment was focused on 3 areas: becoming more sustainable in our own operations, investing in our communities and helping our communities to be more sustainable, and then finally accelerating the transition to a greener economy. And so within that 2012 commitment, we announced $100 million to invest in environmental philanthropy in 2 focus areas. One is community resiliency, helping our communities become more sustainable, and the other is clean tech and innovation. And so we thought about who we were as a company and where we could have the most impact from a clean tech and innovation perspective. We are a leading investor in solar and wind energy. We've invested about $4 billion over the last several years in wind and energy projects. We have a very successful clean tech commercial banking office, so we bank many clean technology companies. We have about 100 million square feet of space, so we have a large footprint that could be an incubator, frankly, for clean technology as we thought about it. We're a leading lender to small businesses, and so we thought of all of these ways that we could use our internal expertise, our internal capabilities in the clean technology space. We then thought, through our philanthropy, we've gotten to know NREL. We've gotten to know many universities that are leading the way on clean technology research. We are a leading sponsor of the Clean Technology Open. We've gotten to know a lot of the accelerators around the country that are making a difference in the clean technology space. And we took this internal capability as well as these external relationships, and we really challenged ourselves to think about how could we bring, we've heard the term several times today, how could we create a ecosystem for collaboration with our internal expertise, our footprint, and our external relationships. And so we engaged on a strategic relationship with the National Renewable Energy Lab about 1.5 years ago and launched a program called the Innovation Incubator, IN2. It's a $10 million 5-year relationship to really accelerate the development of clean technology. It's by invitation only, and so we work with these channel partners, these accelerators, and these universities to invite clean technology entrepreneurs to submit ideas, proposals to the program. We had, in the first round, 80 technologies submitted. We narrowed it down to 4, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The technologies that are submitted get validated in the NREL laboratories. They get some funding, in-kind and direct funding. And then they get beta tested in our facilities when they come out the other end. So we thought, that was a way to bring together all the pieces of expertise that we had as a company, all the leverage that we had as a company to create this collaboration to really accelerate clean technology development.
We'll go into this more as we go further. Apologies, I should stick to my mic here. With that, I'd like to introduce Arūnas Česonis. I hope I got that right. He's the co-founder of the Česonis Family Foundation, and we were lucky enough to have a little bit of time to chat before this. Would love to hear about how you got involved with investing in clean technology, specifically with MIT and others, and also what you're doing now in terms of scaling.
So good morning, everyone. So how it happens all the time is you're talking to your wife, you want to start something in the environment and wildlife, you get all excited, and then the development folks from your university come to see you, and they're asking for money. So that's how we got involved. They came to ask for money. We said, what we're going to do, let's focus on ignition grants for environment. Turns out after 2 years of that, my wife and I both figured out half the issues were dependence on fossil fuels, impact to wildlife. So we said, okay, let's go in energy. So we met this really charismatic professor at MIT at the point in 2007, Ernie Moniz. And we said, let's go. Okay, let's go, Ernie. What can we do differently than other people have thought of? And we interviewed all the faculty and the staff, and they said, look, we need some like slush money. We need a bunch of money that we don't have to hit milestones, that we can chase breakthrough ideas with the best and brightest kids out there, that we can give them 3 to 5 year commitments on fellowships so they can most likely fail. But that's what you need to do because otherwise they're going to go to the next best place. So we launched 12 different projects back in 2008. We got lucky because Obama administration got elected and ARPA-E was created. So out of the 37 initial ARPA-E projects back in the first phase, 5 of our projects got funded out of those 37. So we got lucky, got off to the races. They got second funding levels, third funding levels, all kinds of tranches. So it was fun. At the same time, once you start giving away money, people start coming to ask you for more money on the for-profit side. So we must have looked at 75 business models came at us those 4 or 5 years, and we ended up choosing 4. So when you fast forward to today, we've probably put $40 million to work in both sort of breakthrough research projects and these 5 startups, and we've learned a bunch of stuff in the last 5-6 years.
Go further on that too, also in the next round.
That was our cue, right?
Scott, it's great to have you here. You're the co-chair of the Wallace Global Fund. Your endowment you've decided to not only divest, but you're also doing investments out of your endowment. Very much what we heard earlier from Jagdeep. And would love to hear about how you're thinking about this and what you're doing and why the Wallace Global Fund is doing that.
Good morning, everybody. I guess what makes us different as a foundation is that instead of just using our 5% that we spend on grants, we decided about 5 years ago to put all of our assets into mission-aligned investing so that 5% is not at war with the 95%. Our foundation, the Wallace Global Fund, has long been focused on the balance between humans and the planet. Is the balance sustainable? Are we taking too much? My grandfather, who created our foundation with assets from a very successful business he founded to hybridize seed corn a long time ago, 90 years ago, as vice president of the United States, he used to quote Teddy Roosevelt, "To skin and exhaust the earth will undermine the days of our children." I always wondered, what did that mean? How did Teddy Roosevelt, or my grandfather 3/4 of a century ago, know that the Earth's resources could be exhausted? There was no notion of limits on fossil fuels, or on trees, or soil, or water, or even animals. Rhinoceros, elephant. Now we've learned some things are just not sustainable. Either there's not enough of them, or burning them all will undermine the days of our children. Last September, I was in New York with the folks from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund when they joined in announcing that they would never again invest in fossil fuels and would instead commit to investing in clean energy solutions. Yeah, that's the Standard Oil Rockefellers. I remember the explanation given that day by Valerie Rockefeller Wayne that her great-grandfather, J.D. Rockefeller, was not just about oil, but about sustainable solutions. In his day, energy came from a decidedly non-sustainable source, whale oil. He figured that flammable black stuff endlessly spurting out of the ground was more viable in the long term. Today, she explained, he would want something that would last longer and cause less harm. He would be leading the way, she said, toward cleaner energy that will last into the next century and into the ones after that. Though we at the Wallace Global Fund are now known for the movement to divest from fossil fuels and invest in clean energy, we actually started with the clean energy investment side. About a dozen years ago, Al Gore started an investment company focused on long-term sustainability, and we joined, and we did very well. Then we joined their special Clean Energy Climate Solutions Fund, which has also turned out well. Then we woke up one morning and wondered, wait a minute, if our grants are going to renewable energy and environmental sustainability and fighting climate change, and we're making a nice return off some of our investments in green stuff, why on earth do we still own Exxon and Chevron and Halliburton? Aren't we being hypocritical? Aren't our endowment dollars undermining our grant dollars? What would happen if we put our money where our mouth is? So long story short, that's what we did. Not a little bit, but every bit. Every penny is now mission aligned, fully integrated across all asset classes, including all public equities and bonds and venture capital. Over 15% is committed to clean tech venture capital. We were initial investors in SolarCity and Nest. We got into Tesla in 2008 when they needed money most. Now look at them. Car of the year, Powerwall batteries. We live half our year in South Africa, and we see the impact that those Powerwall batteries can have in the developing world, in homes and businesses, to let people buy electricity in the middle of the night when it's cheaper and in low demand, and use it during the day when it's expensive and power plants can't keep up. Solar on individual rooftops available to the remotest villages. Decentralized power, not just humongous national grids. Jobs locally, not just for a few highly skilled technicians at the nuclear reactor. Energy democracy is a key goal of our foundation, our grant-making dollars. What makes more sense, that or whales? Our previous investment advisor, an old friend of my father's and a Wall Street titan, pushed back. I'll make the money, you make the grants. So we moved on. We hired the sustainability group at the Royal Bank of Canada in San Francisco. Now we're consistently outperforming our custom benchmark by 2% net of fees. Coal is down, oil is down, stranded assets, overinflated book value, liability for pollution and climate harms, but renewables, efficiency, clean tech, all in good shape, soaring. The movement to divest from fossil fuels and invest in clean solutions is spreading like wildfire. College endowments from Stanford to Georgetown, pushed by passionate students freaking out about the mess we've left them, cities from Seattle to Ithaca divesting and reinvesting, nations, most recently Norway, their sovereign wealth fund, $900 billion, committed to divest from coal and invest in clean energy solutions. Religious institutions, our dear friend Desmond Tutu said it's a moral imperative equivalent to apartheid to get behind the solutions rather than the problems. And as you know, the Pope is going to come out pretty soon. And scores of foundations. In fact, I think at least 12 are represented in this room. I want to welcome the most recent, the Overbrook Foundation. I understand Carolyn Cole, the investment committee chair, is in the room. And many more will come. So our commitment is that we will remain 100% invested for mission and fossil fuel free. Climate solutions investments, both public and private, are 35% of our portfolio. And we just in the last year committed an additional $20 million to clean tech venture capital.
So all of you have talked about a variety across the spectrum, everything from investing in the early stage all the way to scalable technologies where you are making returns that are equal to what other returns have been. So let me start a little bit both with Arunas and Mary to talk a little bit about how do you move from early stage investments to making sure that these cross the chasm to scale. And Arunas, let me just start with you as a start of what are you doing now based on the lessons that you've learned, and what are some of the lessons you've learned?
So myself and our young management teams, we made lots of mistakes over the last 5 or 6 years, just like most of us do. What we really learned is their first initial product that they thought they were going to launch ended up not being their first product they actually launched. Now, they all have in their minds how they want to help the planet and make money, do good at the same time. The challenge is they can't charge more for their product or service than what their customers are currently spending. There is no green premium in my mind. People will not spend more for something clean versus dirty. They just won't. Maybe there's one exception here and there. So what they ended up doing is chasing the most commercially viable, low-hanging fruit, which to me, for all these companies, they're all still doing well. They're growing. It's not a valley of death for them. To me, it's a valley of higher impact, because they're going to make money, they're going to grow, they're going to do their things, but they're not able to really achieve the growth in these other areas that can have a high impact for the environment, for the planet, because it's not necessarily lined up perfectly for the clients. I'll give you an example. So we have a water production company called Gradient. Cleans up the produced water from oil and gas wells. 2 commercial plants in the Permian Basin, 10,000 barrels a day. It's not a pilot, it's for real. It's in production. When oil dropped down over the last 12 months, there's not as much and not as many rigs out there, so there's not as much need for recycled or fresh water for more fracking projects everywhere. So really it's about a cost of disposal. So if you're spending more than, or less than $2 a barrel for disposal in these saltwater disposal wells, because we're dumping most of that water back into the earth, never to be seen again, they won't buy from you. So we're focused in drilling areas with scarcity of water. So Permian, Colorado, there's still some places that are drilling. You go to a place like California. California is in one of the most extreme drought areas in the world right now. They have millions upon millions of barrels of water coming out of the ground from the oil and gas wells. And what are they doing with it? They are not cleaning it. They are putting it right back down the earth way far that will never touch the freshwater aquifers again. It is insane what they're doing from a sort of the high-level vision thing. But the problem is it's cheaper because they could just dump it for $1, $1.50. They still believe they're going to get sort of new saltwater disposal wells permitted in some of these areas. There's views on seismic activity. We'll see if that plays out the way they're talking about. But it's cheaper to dump than to clean. And they're drilling all these new wells for fresh water for farms. That's the kind of program that would easily be something foundations could get involved in to sort of bridge the gap on the financial program. I know it's sort of self-serving, it's my company, right? So I should probably say that. But it's just amazing how many of these startup companies around the world have those kinds of opportunities, and we can help them out.
And Mary, how do you think about that in terms of moving from investments from a grant perspective to thinking about the commercialization?
So the IN2, the Innovation Incubator program, is really focused on that valley of opportunity. It's how do we get the ideas from the laboratory to commercial viability. And so our program, once your technology is selected, you get to be validated at the facilities at NREL. So you get to show exactly in a test environment what your technology can do. We provide grant support. We provide business mentorship support to help these entrepreneurs grow their businesses and manage their businesses well. And then we provide, a Fortune 100 footprint to actually demonstrate your technology. And so with that mentorship and that seed funding, the validation in the lab, and then a demonstration in a real-world setting, we hope that's enough to accelerate the viability of these businesses.
Scott, I am at Georgetown University and just went through that vote with the students. And it was very exciting to see the conversation and how much they have been passionate about divestment. When I meet and when we meet with the investment office, the question that consistently comes up, and you mentioned it as part of your remarks, is are there enough scalable opportunities to make continuous investments out of your portfolio? And can you meet the benchmarks that you need to meet as a endowment and also to pay for the scholarships and everything else? What do you tell other investment officers and how to think about this? Because I hear this on a consistent basis, not just from Georgetown, but every time I go to a conference, this is the conversation.
Well, that's the same conversation we have every time we talk about this with any other group, and that's why we decided to start 5 years ago, and because we had the same concerns when we started. Are we going to have to give up? I mean, we do have a fiduciary duty on the board to conserve the assets and grow them, but we just decided to try it and see if we could show the way in a way that is safe and would assure other foundations. And now we've got 100 other foundations, and the students they just love the cause, that they can actually do something about the greatest issue of their generation. And we can assure them that so far the market is not tapped out. We are well ahead of our benchmark. And so we're very privileged and pleased that we are doing well and doing good.
Yeah, please.
I think it's outstanding what you're doing, just outstanding. And I think one of the areas that we can turbocharge your ability to do other things, because you go back, there's not enough of those clean tech investments across the world today to put all those endowment dollars to work from the core endowment. But there's especially in the US, IRS and DOE have partnered up really nicely to put together a focus on program-related investments. Stanford's been working research on it. Prime is an organization. Other people are working on this, where you take that 5% endowment that you got to give away every year to keep your not-for-profit status. So that's almost like, instead of just, I won't say putting your name on a building or doing some other grants that are still incredibly important, you can put those to work in long-term debt or equity instruments in a lot of these startups to help them through that valley. Whatever valley you're talking about, you can help through a valley. And I think that's something where, as good as ARPA-E is, if you took just a fraction of those 5% endowment dollars that have to go out somewhere to be granted, just a fraction of that probably is 10 times ARPA-E's grants every year. It's a ridiculous number. So I would just encourage you to consider those kind of turbocharging techniques.
And let me just follow up on this. You joined the Prime Coalition, and I'd be interested in why did you decide to join, and kind of what do you hope, and how do you hope to commercialize some of the things that come out of the Prime Coalition?
Well, again, it goes back to not having a choice, right? So one of my first relationships was with Sarah Carney, the founder of Prime, and she was running our family foundation for a few years in Boston for us. And through her thesis advisor and the work that she's done during her degree, she focused on this type of impact investing and where she could play a role. And so she's collaborated with a lot of different people in this room and elsewhere. And I was outnumbered. I had no choice. Plus, she's very persuasive. You got to go with her. So.
And Mary, how do you think, you talked a little bit about the incubation services, the technical assistance you offer. There is still this question, is the pipeline large enough for scale? And how does Wells Fargo, both from a foundation but an investment perspective, think about moving from investments but also to scaling commercialization?
We think the pipeline's large enough. As we said, as we said, we had 80 companies that applied in round one. Round one was limited to building efficiency technologies. So we kind of created a focus area for our first year, and it'll be also for our second year of investment. Any technologies that we funded had to have measurable impact on building efficiency, building resource usage, had more than enough technologies to choose from, and that was limiting it to one segment of the technology market space. You know, we could expand as a large mortgage lender to residential technologies. We could expand as a large ag lender to agricultural technologies. There is no shortage of need for innovation, and we think no shortage of entrepreneurship in this space. So we're not concerned. The 4 companies that we announced, and you'll get to hear from one of our CEOs on a later panel, Liquid Cool decreased total data center energy usage by up to 40%. Smarter Shade reduced energy in buildings by 30%. Energy storage systems, energy storage at 30% of the current costs. And then Wattstick is a metering technology that reduced costs by 10%. So pretty measurable improvements from an efficiency perspective just in year one. We're not worried about running out of new technologies, new entrepreneurs to reach out to and evaluate in the future. That's not really a concern of ours.
That's great. Arunas, you mentioned the PRI, MRI investments, and just for everybody, today's announcement I think shows that the Treasury Department will be releasing more guidance on how foundations and others can have more effective use of their PRI, MRI dollars towards investments in clean technologies, but also in impact in general. So very excited to see the administration's announcement on that. Scott, do you use all of those tools that Arunas was talking about in terms of the debt capital, the grant capital, the investment capital, not just from the Wallace Global Fund's endowment, but as the fund itself?
We do. We try to coordinate our grant dollars with our investment dollars. We don't do all of our endowment in clean tech. I mean, we align with other mission goals. We have a women's empowerment program. We work a lot at the bottom of the pyramid in Africa, so we try to, there are lots of great opportunities for impact investing in Africa and the global south. They're very exciting, and which actually do very well also. But I think we're kind of unusual in our foundation where all of our program officers are involved in the investment side. So they've got their ears to the ground and they say, hey, wait a minute. Here's a company I just heard about that has designed an IUD inserter that women can use themselves. Never before been done. You don't need a doctor. And it's just taken off. We invested in Plan B, the contraceptive, the morning after pill, and a tiny investment increased by like 10 million%. So all of our program officers are always bringing us stuff like this. We hand it over to the investment people. And we've done some brilliant stuff. It's a lot of fun.
And can you talk a little bit, all of you, so the question to all of you individually, talk about coalition building, because we talked about, Jagdeep talked about this a little bit in his panel. It's not just about what you do individually, but what is it that you all are doing together with others? How does it work? Is it effective? What are the things that you're doing to make sure that in order to move the market, that there's a coalition and it's just not just individual investments?
Yeah. Well, that's a key point of this divest invest movement that is now in hundreds of college campuses and 100 foundations as of today, I think. And so we try to coordinate, we try to share information. There is actually a new nonprofit that we helped create called Divest Invest Philanthropy, which is a convening forum, information sharing. And so if we hear about something brilliant in the clean tech space or anywhere else in our grant making areas, we're happy to share that. It's also a critically important way to free up the money we had in fossil fuels. Where does the capital come from? We take it out of here and we put it over there. And if 100 foundations and pension funds and cities are doing the same thing, then we can share information and have quite a leveraged impact.
So it's pretty similar to what you were talking about before. We do half our investing at MIT out of clean tech, and then half investing out of University of Rochester on the healthcare side. And so what we've done is partnered up with the Advancement Office. There's 3,300 high-end donors that are alums or friends of the University of Rochester around the world, mostly outside of Rochester. So every university has those sort of high-end donors. So we're going to be approaching them now, and we're launching sort of discussions, online chats, all kinds of abilities for all of them, which are pretty much 100%, 99% accredited investors, to come in and get involved in early stage investing, supporting these spin-outs out of the university. So you'll have alums that are in China, in India, in places where it's sometimes difficult to reach them for events, and they just want to feel connected to the university, not just the people that are in your hometown. So it's almost like a synthetic VC that's kinder, gentler, hopefully, less ornery than some other VCs out there.
And for us, the power of collaboration was key as well. We have a market presence in many geographies and have gotten to know, through our local market presence, the local accelerators, clean technology business accelerators. We've gotten to know the universities that are doing great research and have increasing expertise in this space. And so we really wanted to create a forum to connect all of that good work that's happening. And I think NREL, I'll give a shout out, it was a great partner for us in the sense that not only do we have access to their laboratory and expertise, but that by working with NREL, we have expertise to the other labs and other DOE facilities across the company. And so we've created collaboration at the university level, at the entrepreneur level, and then created collaboration within the federal laboratory system to really bring the pieces together to really pick the technologies that we think are going to have the most impact and help them catalyze them to commercial development. So it's been pretty powerful.
Well, this is great. We've come to the close of our panel and our time. I came to the White House in 2009, and impact investing was a theory and an idea we talked about. And now it's great to see the scale and what's happening, especially in the clean energy, clean technology sector, but across different sectors, healthcare and other places. And that's exactly the research that we're doing also at Georgetown at the Beck Center, which is how can finance help scale impact more effectively. So it's great to have each of you here and your stories, but thank you for sharing this information. And also just the importance of the philanthropic capital in catalyzing and moving to scale the sector. So thank you all. Thank you for everything you're doing.